So the idea today is just it's a discussion. For those who haven't been to 260 Chat events, it's a discussion. It's a conversation. Let's try and interact as much as we can. Let's be polite. Let's put our phones on silent. And obviously let's, when we raise our hands to make a comment, ask a question, just give us a short introduction to who you are, your name, and maybe the organization that you represent, and try to keep it short so that we could accommodate as many people as possible. I'm not going to take too much time up here. I will start probably from my right and get the panelists to introduce themselves. I think it's important. They'll talk a little bit about the work they do. And in the process, we're just trying to demystify this big phrase, human rights. What does human rights mean? What does it mean to Zimbabwe? And of course, we want to focus on the organizations that work in that sector or with human rights, and get them to sort of demystify, debunk, and explain a little bit about what they do, to us here in the audience. Turn to the chairman of the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, Chairman Mugwadi, to share a little bit about what he does and what they do with the commission, and to sort of to start this event.
The New People-Driven Constitution Amendment Number 20, Act 2013, is a comprehensive Bill of Rights under Chapter 4, which succinctly outlines all rights issues, including the socio-economic and cultural rights, which were non-existent in the former Lancaster House Constitution, notwithstanding the 19 successive amendments which the latter experienced during its lifetime. The Constitution clearly spells out on whom the duty to respect fundamental human rights and freedoms rests at Section 44, which stipulates that the state and every person, including juristic persons, and every institution and agency of the government at every level must respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights and freedoms set out in this chapter. In order to ensure full realization of the rights and freedoms enshrined in Chapter 4, the Constitution has also created Chapter 12 independent commissions supporting democracy and established under Section 232, which include the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, the Zimbabwe Media Commission, and the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, which is still to be constituted. Their general objectives collectively include, but are not limited to, support and entrench human rights and democracy, to protect the sovereignty and interests of the people, and others as they appear under Section 233 of the Constitution. Section 242 of the Constitution speaks to the establishment and composition of the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, whilst Section 243 gives shape to its legal mandate, to the legal mandate of the Commission by detailing its core functions, which include to promote awareness of and respect for human rights and freedoms at all levels of society. B, to promote the protection, development, and attainment of human rights and freedoms. C, to monitor, assess, and ensure observance of human rights and freedoms. D, to receive and consider complaints from the public and provide redress as it considers appropriate. E, to protect the public against abuse of power and maladministration by state and the public institutions and by the officers of those institutions. The Commission also is empowered to direct the Commissioner General of Police, and I need to underline this one, to direct the Commissioner General of Police to carry out an investigation where it considers that human rights have been violated and to report it to it. The Constitution further provides in terms of Section 321 for the enactment of legislation facilitate implementation of the aforesaid onerous responsibilities. For this purpose, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission Act, Chapter 1030, was promulgated on 12 October 2012, 2 years after establishment of the Commission and appointment of the pioneer commissioners. We have since submitted an alignment bill for presentation before Parliament. In terms of its reporting process, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, like any other commission, is required in terms of Section 323 to report annually to Parliament through the responsible minister, who is the Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, and current First Vice President, Honorable Emmerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa. In the Act, Section 8 of the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission provided for the Commission to report to the minister responsible, who would then table that report before Parliament. But this has now been overridden by this constitutional provision that I referred to, which is intended to guarantee the independence of the Commission. In terms of the Act, also further reports on pertinent human rights related matters may, in addition to the annual report, be submitted to Parliament. In discharge of its responsibility, the Commission managed without the Secretariat, as it had not been appointed, to prepare, print, and submit the 2010 to 2012 annual report. The report highlighted the journey to operationalization of the Commission through capacity building of commissioners, ensuring the enactment of a Paris Principles compliant legislation, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission Act, which I have referred to, securing and establishing 2 regional offices, respectively, in Harare and Bulawayo, building collaborative partnerships with development partners, and the recruitment of a secretariat, which was only effected after 1st June 2014, when the Commission had been provided with a reasonably operational budget. The Commission managed to observe and monitor the March 2013 referendum and the 31 July 2013 harmonized elections, and subsequently produced credible reports which were made public, which can also be accessed on our website, and which were also submitted to Parliament. In terms of its investigative and monitoring responsibilities, the Commission investigated in August 2014 the plight of the Tokwe Mukosi flood victims and produced the Chingwizi report with comprehensive recommendations, some of which I believe are now being implemented by government. The Commission has also investigated the plight of the Choloso flood victims and has prepared a report which will soon be submitted to Parliament. As part of its international reporting obligation to the International Coordinating Committee, the ICC, the Commission is involved through its participation in the Internal Universal Periodic Review, the UPR, processes of the state, where it makes inputs of the human rights situation in the country. Since the Commission is not yet accredited to the ICC, it cannot for now submit any parallel reports to those of government.
Okay, I will talk about the work that the Zimbabwe Peace Project does. And the vision of the Zimbabwe Peace Project is a Zimbabwe where there is peace, justice, dignity, and development for all. ZPP operates through a network of monitors who are dotted throughout the country in all electoral constituencies. And they become the eyes and ears of the organization. It's deliberate that they are community-based because that then ensures that they know who the players are if there are any violations that are to be reported. We have 2 monitors in each constituency, and Zimbabwe has 210 constituencies, and therefore we have 420 monitors who are in the constituencies. And on a monthly basis, based on the information that is gathered by our monitors, ZPP produces a monthly monitoring report. And since we started operating, we have mainly been focusing on monitoring politically motivated human rights violations, probably what a lot of people would call political violence. And ZPP was actually established by a group of faith-based organizations and human rights organizations who were concerned by the widespread violence that had wreaked havoc in the country in the year 2000. There was no organization or a vehicle that would bring in information that was related to the violence that was taking place. And this is the reason why they thought of bringing this type of organization. And the Zimbabwe Peace Project monitors and documents human rights violations continuously. We are not kind of guided by special events such as elections. So we produce reports on a month-on-month basis. And that allows us to also be on top of the situation in terms of being able to analyze trends and patterns that could actually be playing out in terms of the human rights situation. What we have noted in terms of numbers is that the incidences have gone down if we compare with prior years. I know that we tapped the tables in 2008 when there was a lot of violence. And from the time that we had the inclusive government, we have generally seen the figures going down. But I would not want to mislead people to say we just need to be guided by the figures that we have got, because there are other dynamics that sort of determine what is happening in the field. And at the moment, what we have recognized is that there's also a lot of the more covert forms of violence. Those are kind of the majority of cases that we are having to deal with. In some instances, those cases are so subtle that the people whose rights are being violated at times fail to realize that their rights have actually been violated. I think looking at the 3 months for which we have produced reports in 2015, being January, February, and March, the figures have been hovering around 155 violations in January, 152 violations in February, and 156 violations in March. But I think in terms of the people who are affected by these incidences, the number is actually quite different from the number of violations. In January, we recorded 266 victims. In February, 296, and 341 for March. And what we also do in our reports is that we also try and analyze the information that we get in terms of being able to understand who are the major violators, who are the major perpetrators, who are the major victims. And also at the same time, we are able to sort of look at the sources of conflict that are sort of driving these incidences that we are recording. And for 2015, we have recognized that one of the main sources of conflict is the factionalism that is taking place in the political parties, both Zanu-PF and the MDCT. We have also seen that the expulsion from Parliament of 21 MDC renewal members is also brought in a number of incidences that we have had to document. And we have also recognized that hate language and threats have also dominated the run-up to the by-elections that were held on March 27. And I think we are recognizing the same as we are anticipating the June 10 by-elections. And I think in relation to the June 10 by-elections, we are also very concerned about the violence that is taking place, in particular in Urungwe West, where one of the candidates is not able to get to that constituency. And I'm not sure how he is supposed to campaign if he is part of the elections and he does not step foot in that constituency. And what we have also recognized are the takeover of farms or invasion of farms. But in this period, I'm happy to talk about the resistance that the villagers in and around Maleme Ranch put up, and as a result, that invasion eventually did not happen. And then I think we are also worried with the abduction of journalist and pro-democracy activist Itai Zamara, who disappeared on the 9th of March, and since then, I think it's more than 2 months now, he has not been seen. And the other source of conflict that we have also noted is around the distribution of food and other aid, where we are recognizing that discrimination and denial of access for those who are seen as politically incorrect is quite rampant. And what we have also recognized in 2015 is that some of the people that we have recorded on our database as perpetrators of violence in the past have now been transformed into victims of politically motivated human rights violations. Yet I think in terms of the distribution of food and other aid, I would also want to talk about the situation in terms of the basic education assistance module, which is supposed to assist underprivileged children. But we are told that the Auditor General actually reported that in 2013, $2 million was returned, and yet we still hear about a lot of underprivileged children who are failing to access that assistance, but because of bundling, that amount of money was actually returned before it had been utilized. And I think in that instance, it's quite sad when you look at a situation where a child is denied assistance under the BEAM module simply because either the guardians or the parents are perceived to be politically incorrect. And those people are then denied access to the use of that facility. In terms of food distribution, as well as the distribution of the presidential agricultural inputs, what we have also recognized is that beyond activists of the movement for democratic change, people who are also now being denied and discriminated against are also those who are referred to as the Gabatoks in Zanu-PF. They are also being probably punished for having taken a view probably that they saw fit to themselves, and at the moment they are unable to access food handouts, subsidized food, or the presidential agricultural inputs. And I think I will stop there.
I'll turn over to my brother here, Abel. Chikomo. He's actually on Twitter. I just discovered him today. Which is good, so I'll be following him just now. If you could please just share with us the kind of work you do and what you see and how you're experiencing Zimbabwe in May 2015.
But I work with the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum. You know, we are a network of 21 Zimbabwean human rights NGOs. Jestina here is my vice chairperson as of the 10th of April this year. ZPP is a member of the Human Rights Forum. We work with and through the members. So in terms of the way we operate, actually, we've got a secretariat. You know, the secretariat runs, you know, different programmatic, you know, activities, you know, and these are, you know, per the different, you know, kind of, you know, programmatic units. We've got a research unit, you know, which, you know, does, you know, the monitoring and documentation and publication of, you know, human rights, you know, issues. We have a legal unit which litigates on behalf of victims of human rights abuses. We also have a transitional justice unit, you know, which tries to address the systematic, you know, nature, you know, causes of, you know, rights abuses, and of course talking about things that we ordinarily would not like, you know, to talk about in this country. Talk about our past, you know, talk about the present, you know, kind of things that are happening as far as human rights abuses are concerned. In terms of our monitoring and reporting of human rights, you know, violations, we are guided, obviously, you know, by the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You know, our vision is a society that respects and promotes, you know, protects all human rights of all people. And of course, you know, you can't be a member of the forum if you don't actually believe in all the rights that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so our monitoring also in reporting, you know, takes, you know, cognizance of that particular kind of effect. Historically, of course, we came into being in response to the food riots of January 1998. You know, the veterans, you know, of this struggle are here. I can see, you know, Francis, I see Tony, and others who are sitting in this room. We can give that kind of historical background. So how we monitor, obviously, like I said, we work with and through our members. At the secretariat level, you know, the research unit actually also does primary kind of research. You know, goes out into the field, you know, verifies, you know, some of the information that we receive from our members, or that what we read in the press, what we find out from our different networks. And the legal units, you know, also documents when they actually assist victims, you know, what will be going on, and the research unit then actually takes that also into their monitoring kind of form. So we've got that kind of, you know, link, you know, where we have, you know, the legal kind of cases, you know, that we also document, and then the case that we actually get from actually field kind of research. But even more important is information that we get, you know, from our members. You know, for example, we've got a lawyer stationed at one of our member organizations, CSU. You know, CSU, as you know, receives a lot of victims of torture, and then we provide the legal kind of assistance. And then, of course, we also then document those kind of cases. I think I would say that in brief, that is what the forum does. You know, one of the key areas of work now is around transitional justice. And some of you might know, you know, we established, you know, last year with the assistance of 46 member organizations and partners, a network that we call the National Transitional Justice Network, which tries obviously to advocate around the issues of, you know, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, you know, and, you know, making sure that, you know, we have respect of human rights in this country and we address our past. Commissioner Mugwadi did talk about, you know, about the constitutional dispensation, the new courts, and the progressive clauses that he highlighted there. In our work, obviously, we look at the structural, you know, issues, but we also look at the direct, you know, issues. On the structural issues, we also look at issues like, you know, what are the laws that we have in place? What are the systems that we have in place, obviously, that ensure the respect and promotion of human rights in our country? Of course, the Constitution is very important, you know, document. The reality, of course, may be a different thing altogether. You know, we talk a lot about realignment of the laws. I don't know how many laws have been realigned so far, but we ignore that actually alignment of the laws alone is not enough. We also need policy alignment. We also need institutional alignment. We need even, you know, a change in the kind of, you know, thinking in terms of the people who man those institutions. I'm afraid in this country, it's very difficult to talk about institutions, but it's very easy to talk about individuals who then kind of become the embodiment of institutions. If you talk about the police, for example, you can talk about Commissioner Chihuri, you know, and then he kind of represents the police. You know, the whole institution of the police, you know, can be read, you know, and understood through and via the Commissioner General of the Police, one individual. And that's the challenge. And as a result, of course, you know, we're very weak institutions, and the government constantly tells us that the reason is because we don't have the resources. Our economy is struggling. Government also ignores a very clear fact that there's a direct link between human rights and development. Because we don't have very strong institutions, there is no accountability. And as a result, of course, there's a lot of leakages, and the resources are wasted, are lost to leakages, to corruption. And ultimately also, it becomes very difficult to attract investment and, of course, growth in our country. And you know, poverty becomes a very vicious cycle in our society. That's the reality of present-day Zimbabwe. Quickly about some of the key kind of things that we witnessed today. I would like to associate myself totally and fully with what Jestina observed. I wore this T-shirt, you know, because it speaks to what Zimbabwe is today. And this is the Zimbabwe that I know as a human rights activist, you know, where, you know, speaking your mind, defending the rights of, you know, the poor, the marginalized, the ordinary person. Because human rights are just, to me, they are just the basic, you know, freedoms, the fundamental, you know, rights that I have as a human being. For my grandmother, you know, for example, in Monde Valley there, she is interested to know, obviously, this new constitution that Commissioner Mugwadi talks about. How does it ensure that actually water can flow? You know, how does it ensure that she can have food on the table? And if she doesn't have that, does she have the right actually to speak out about why she's not getting this food? You know, where are the limitations? Where are the problems? Is it because of partisan distribution of food aid or stuff like that? And people like Itai Zamara, my T-shirt reads, Dini Itai Zamara in short, which means I am Itai Zamara. It can be you, it can be me, any one of us could be Itai Zamara. So the message that we are putting out is, we must always remember that we are in that position. That real risk is always there. That any one of us can be abducted like Itai Zamara, can be disappeared like Itai Zamara, and we can go for 2 months without any information as to his whereabouts. We also know, of course, about the xenophobic attacks in South Africa. And for me, what is most interesting and most important is our response as a people, as a nation. You know, citizens try to demonstrate at the embassy. And what does government do in turn? You attack the people who are saying no to xenophobia. So we saw now, you know, Sydney Chisi being attacked as a result. And of course, all those statements coming out. We also worried, obviously, by the statements from the Presidium. The Vice President, Mukoko, who is responsible, I understand, for national healing and reconciliation. You know, he's also the minister. He continuously denies that Bukura ever happened. You know, that is a conspiracy. You know, and then we also have the president himself making all these statements about the Kalanas. Very typical, you know, of this nation. We are a nation that lives in denial. We deny that what happened happened. And we deny that, obviously, we actually said we will forgive each other and forget in 1980. And then we go on and kill each other. And then we say we never killed each other. Right? And the same president also is on record saying he would be interested to know which judge would sit to preside over a matter to do with the Ditmas. You know, and his Gamma Talks faction, so-called. Now, you would believe, obviously, that, you know, when you have got this kind of new constitution, so democratic, you know, so progressive, we would begin to respect separation of powers as well. But when it comes from the very, as we say, a fish goes from the head, you know, the president himself indicating that he has no respect for the judiciary. Same statement that he uttered in 2002, that he would only respect those court judgments that he believed were, you know, from what he believed were independent judges and were, you know, progressive kind of decisions. Jestina talked already about the intra-party violence. I don't need to repeat that. But factionalism in Zanu-PF is also causing problems for civil society when you try to go out and do work in communities. Because there are so many, people in communities now who control who comes in, the gatekeepers. You can be given permission, which you don't need anyway to be given by anyone. But if someone else from a different faction believes that, okay, this authority came from the wrong faction, you'll be stopped. So it means it's very difficult for us even to do work on the Constitution, which itself in Section 7 says civil society and government should educate people about this document. We can't even do that work in some constituencies because of the partisan and of course the factionalism in our society. Lastly, I think any society that fails to protect its prisoners, I don't know what we can say about that kind of society. We have seen what happened in Chikomo, and I think the so-called mutiny at Chikomo, to me, simply illustrates the levels of frustration by people who are so exposed and who are so weak that they decide that we cannot have this anymore, this kind of treatment. And what happens in 10? People are shot. I was talking to Commissioner Mugwadi just before the session and said, well, how many people actually were killed in Chikomo? He knows 5, or he heard about 5, which is what we have heard officially. But there's so much rumor, there's so much speculation that, in fact, more than 5 people. The number that is, touted is 39 people died. Well, I don't have, the evidence because I don't know how those people were, the bodies were disposed of. But what we know for a fact is that people were shot, right? And they were killed. What we also know is that people who are suspected to be the ringleaders of the mutiny have been tortured. The Human Rights Forum and Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, for instance, have gone into Chikomo and interviewed, those people, and we've got evidence, we've got information that they were tortured. And we call ourselves, a democratic government, a constitutional democracy with a very progressive new constitution. Sad, but that is Zimbabwe. But just remember, you can be Itai Dzamara. In fact, you are Itai Dzamara. You just happen to be in this fortunate position that you have not yet been abducted. Why do I say that? The infrastructure of rights abuses in this country is very much intact. There has been no reform whatsoever. So it means people can just take you as and when they wish to, and nothing will happen to them if at all you get to know who they are. And if you get to know who they are, what do?
I'll turn to Stephen Feldstein. He's also on Twitter, so Steve J. Feldstein, Feldstein. I think I got that right.
Great. Well, thank you, Nigel, for moderating, and I'm very happy to be in the company of such illustrious panelists, human rights defenders, and activists. I have personally learned a lot in the last 15 minutes or so from the different perspectives that they've brought. As you can tell, I'm the one person here who is not from Zimbabwe. In fact, I've only been in Zimbabwe for about 24 or 26 hours, so I still have the excuse of jet lag in case I say something that's either incoherent or incomprehensible. I'm happy to be here in the United States. I am based in Washington, and I'm responsible for democracy, human rights, and labor issues all around sub-Saharan Africa. So in my role, I've had a chance to visit many countries on the continent and to look at, discuss, and talk about the human rights issues that different populations around the continent face. I've been looking forward to visiting Zimbabwe for quite a while, so this is a really good opportunity, I think, to talk about both the Human Rights Report, which is what my area, the State Department, is primarily responsible for, as well as to talk a little bit about how we view and how our policies intersect with the human rights situation here. So again, I'm very, very happy to be in this forum, and I look forward to the interactive part of this discussion momentarily. I think one issue or one principle I'd like to just start out with is that a question that Nigel posed at the beginning is the question of what does actually human rights mean? How do people understand that? Well, how do we define that term? And I think oftentimes that's something that I'm presented with and I'm asked about. And the first thing that I always want to say is that human rights is not something, it's not a U.S. issue. It is not something that's derived from being from America. It's a universal proposition. It derives from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It derives from other international conventions and treaties, which most countries around the world, Zimbabwe included, is a signatory to. And so it's really something I think that we all share. And so even while the United States has an annual human rights report that talks about observations and reports of different human rights situations from countries around the world, it is not anything that's because that the United States in particular is the origin for or is the sole keeper of human rights principles. It's far from the case. So I just want to say that I think first and foremost the idea that human rights are universally shared, universally owned by people around the world is an extremely important concept. Now, I guess about the Human Rights Report, just to give a little background in terms of what that is. That's actually something that was passed into law and it's mandated by Congress through the Secretary of State. It's a report for countries around the world, and really it's meant to shed light on and discuss the different, whether it's violations, conditions, circumstances, and issues related to human rights in different places. I think the reason that we have these reports is that they not only provide important information for the U.S. Congress, for other executive branch agencies, but they also provide, I hope, important information for academics, for think tanks, for research when it comes to establishing a baseline in terms of what we perceive as the condition of human rights in particular places. I would also say that they're not meant to be comprehensive. So they're not meant to be on a country-by-country basis, something where we describe every single violation taking place. But they're meant to be illustrative. They're meant to form a narrative, and a story, and a picture on a given year about what we perceive to be the human rights condition in a place. So, that kind of brings then to the question of what is the U.S. perspective and how do we think about human rights when it comes to Zimbabwe. I would say that there have been persistent concerns from the U.S. perspective when it comes to human rights in Zimbabwe, really starting from 2000, in the early 2000s, where we started viewing a number of incidents as departures from the rule of law, from an appropriate constitutional process, from free and fair elections. In fact, in 2001, our Congress passed the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, which prohibits U.S. support for debt relief and new loans to Zimbabwe, which reflected, I think, a shared concern between both the Congress as well as the executive branch and the president, the deteriorating human rights situation in Zimbabwe. And then from there, we got to 2003, where an executive order was issued by the president, at that time, President George Bush, that because of significant human rights concerns, it imposed upon a specially designated group sanctions, and that those restrictions in some form continue to the present day. I think the key point when it comes to our policy and our position on human rights is that we have concern when it comes to fundamental rights to freedom of expression and freedom of association, among other issues on the human rights agenda. One issue that has been raised already by several panelists, but I think is important to also raise from the U.S. perspective, is the situation of the disappearance of the activist Itai Zamara. This, to us, is something that raises significant concerns, and what we have discussed with the government is to make sure to conduct a full and transparent investigation. We have heard different allegations about the circumstances of the disappearance. I think it's important that we try to get the facts out as quickly as we can. We don't know what has happened when it comes to Mr. Zamara, but what we do know is that we are concerned when someone who is a prominent human rights voice and a prominent representative of the civil society in Zimbabwe, it all of a sudden disappears without any real answers, leaving a lot of questions. And so that to us is sort of one of the issues that's emblematic of some of the concerns that we have when it comes to human rights in Zimbabwe. I would say, I would point to what our president has said when it comes to the issue of human rights and the relationship to development and economics. Really what Obama has said is that development depends on good governance. That is a change that can unlock Africa's potential, and it is a responsibility that can be met only by Africans. And I think that's really an important issue. I think the issue when it comes to political freedom, stability, it is in the lasting interest of all people, especially the people of Zimbabwe, for this to be the condition that happens and that takes place in the future. I would also say that for the United States, we stand as a friend to the people of Zimbabwe, as a partner, to help advance these efforts and to help do what we can to be supportive of improving the human rights situation. I would finally also say as well is that our policies towards Zimbabwe, they're not static. They're not fixed in time. While currently we have a set of restrictions that are in place, when meaningful progress does take place, when changes do occur, when the human rights condition, as reported by my friends and partners here on the panel, when they report to us that things have improved, then I think that that also necessitates us to examine very carefully what our approach is to Zimbabwe and make sure that it aligns correctly. So I would really end my portion by saying that we do not look upon Zimbabwe in isolation. We do not, when we come up with the human rights reports, this is based on the reporting, the observations that come from partners on the ground, from local voices, whether on the panel or here today in a room or in other places. It comes from the civil society community. It comes from quasi-autonomous entities like the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. It comes from many others who we rely on to help make sure that we are reporting and representing accurately the situation in the country. So with that, I will turn it back over to our moderator.
I just want to ask a couple of, maybe 3 questions, just to kickstart things off, because I think, and I could be wrong, and I'm often wrong, and my wife will confirm that one. I think that most people don't understand the term human rights. So when I think about it, as a citizen of this country, City Council right now are talking about prepaid water meters. And I think, I could be wrong, that installing a prepaid water meter forces those who have to be able to buy water, and those who don't have to not have access to water. To me, that's a human rights issue. But I could be wrong. My aunt, I'll always talk about my aunt, and I'll use this opportunity. Every time I have a mic, I'll talk about my aunt. She lives in the village. She's obviously a woman. She represents the majority of people in this country. 52% of the population are women. 62% of the population, I think it is, live in the rural areas. She doesn't understand the term human rights. I've heard the panel speak about human rights reports and what they do and how they collate it and how this other big report comes out. But what I'm concerned about is how do we get people like my aunt involved in the conversation? It's interesting, Ms. Mukoko spoke about the issue of how some people get food. So she's disgruntled, even up to this day. A few years ago, someone said to her, we can't get the maize because your brother works in town, or I think we think you support this party, or I don't like the dress you're wearing the other day, or the reasons can vary. But the issue is, what is human? I guess the opening question is, what are human rights, and how come the ordinary people, I think, don't understand what human rights are all about? Again, that's just an open-ended question. Maybe you can just start by sharing maybe why we as people don't know what human rights are all about.
Nigel, human rights, the foundation for human rights is the UN Universal Declaration for Human Rights of 1948, which stipulates those entitlements which are said to be universal, indivisible, and inalienable, and they have to be respected for them to guarantee the dignity of the person. In other words, they cannot be denied by any individual. They are God given. The issue of water you made reference to is indeed a human rights issue. And the new constitution, well, it's no longer new, but the current constitution makes reference to progressive realization of the socio-economic and cultural rights. And that now depends on the availability of resources. I am happy someone mentioned that there's no development without human rights. The two are inseparable, because you can't beat your chest and say we are a democratic institution when in the corner of the country there are people who are starving, they are not getting food. The issue of why this realization is not spread out is institutions which are supposed to have that respect, like the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, only new on the human rights terrain. And they have the responsibility of going out there, bringing awareness to the people of their rights. People have to know what these entitlements are for them to make a claim. They also have to know who the duty bearer is, who is supposed to look after their rights. The Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission is only in a watchdog, which has to make sure that government, in all respect, has to ensure that the rights of people are protected, they are promoted, and that they are realized. That's what I need to say in short.
By the way, my only problem, I like what Commissioner Mugwadi says, but my only problem with the observation on the progressive realization of human rights is that we make an assumption here, that the resources that we have are so few that we cannot actually, devote resources to, this socio-economic kind of entitlements. And yet we realize that our priorities are what is wrong. How much money are we investing in security, for example, and what is our security, threats as a country? And how much money are we investing, in human rights abuses instead of promoting human rights as a country? How much are we investing in policing, and poor policing, as a country, for example? So, I mean, when international law speaks about, progressive realization of human rights, it's not giving an excuse for anyone, like we actually want to believe. To say, okay, you can forget about socioeconomic rights, just make the claim that we don't have money, So when we have money, we will satisfy that particular kind of obligation as the duty bearers, But in the meantime, we can put money, into the police, so they can go and terrorize demonstrators. They can go and stop people from participating in this kind of things, which is part of the reason why it is difficult to convince my grandmother in Honde Valley, to take part in these issues, because there's fear, and it's real. There's a reason why that fear is there. But the other thing, of course, is that we have not debunked this idea. It still remains up there, between you and me,
Yeah. I think it's a very elitist thing. Those who know, those who work in the circles will understand what human rights. The rest of us, the other day someone called me an activist. I was like, hey, that's a big word.
I wanted to say for your aunt, I think she needs to understand that human rights are not a privilege. By being human, she's entitled to those to those rights, and she will actually be within her confines if she demands those rights. So no one is doing her a favor, and I think it's important that we also understand that the rights that were being fought for by the nationalists back then are the same rights that we are talking about here. They have not changed. So it's important that we recognize that when people are demanding their rights, they need to be respected.
Hi, Tony Reeler from the Research and Advocacy Unit. I think the point about citizens not understanding their rights is not entirely correct. I think citizens have a fairly good idea about their rights because they understand when their rights are violated. I mean, you know, I'm old enough to remember an entire population here getting really tired of white colonial rule because of the discrimination. They knew that there were rights that they weren't getting. But in addition, in trying to address the problem, Abel made the point earlier on about the, if you want, the repressive apparatus. And the problem is really the state. There's plenty of laws right now that the state just doesn't implement. And I'll give you 2 examples. The Police Act says absolutely clearly, in an appendix, no policeman shall belong to a political party, right? May not belong to a political party, may not even give the impression that he belongs to a political party. I don't think anybody tells the police that that's a violation of the Police Act. So any policeman who put on the insignia, a badge of any political party, whatever it was, should immediately be charged under the Police Act for being partisan. It's a very simple thing. Right now, you just have to have an instruction, thou shalt obey the act. The second one, for example, and it also relates to the repressive apparatus, is the Traditional Leaders Act. It is very explicit that traditional leaders, chiefs, headmen, village heads, shall be non-partisan. They shall act on behalf of all citizens. Now, if those 2 groups in Zimbabwe adhere to the existing law, right, which doesn't violate the Constitution, it's their behavior that violates the Constitution. If they just obey the laws right now, well, actually a significant range of problems would disappear, from gross human rights violations, torture in police stations, distribution of food, a whole series of problems would disappear. And I suggest that every Zimbabwean citizen understands those 2 problems absolutely and utterly. They're not confused about their rights there.
Where one or different groups of people, whether it's civic society, whether it's MDC or Zanu-PF, whichever aspects, whichever organizations are concerned, they believe that they're the ones who are representing the rights of the people. And no one is really having a conversation about what the universal right of the Zimbabwean is. So what essentially happens is that you have different conversations, everybody taking people into their camps. We're these people that go protesting. You know, we're the ones who went to war, so therefore we are the ones who confer rights. We are the human rights defenders. You hear that statement, so we're the ones who protect you against the state. So in all that's happening, we are all responsible for the confusion that Tete has because she doesn't know who to listen. Because next week when you come and you say, oh no, there's something that's happening with these guys who are from the state, then they start fearing the state. And then the state comes and says, no, that person's connected to the United States or whatever it is, whichever enemy they decide to choose on that day, then it becomes a different kind of issue. And then just to finish off, one of the biggest issues we have is empirical evidence. Like, what is the actual evidence? Because I always say receipts result in accountability. And one of the things that is key is that Mukoko just said was a lot of dramatic things that you talk about when you say people are being denied access to different kinds of services and so forth. But until we have empirical evidence that says these are the types of people that are being not getting access, it's not really an isolated thing that's happening in Uruguay or wherever it is. And it's not criminal elements who think, oh, we can take advantage of this confusion and just say we claim to be part of this faction. Therefore, you know, in all that confusion, take more than what you're supposed to do. So in essence, it comes to, while people know when they're violated, what they don't know is what the law and everything else, all the apparatus that exist, can actually do for them. And until we have a situation where we understand, as human beings, that is basic human being understands that there are certain universal human rights that are not conferred upon you by either a political party, a civic society, or your parents for that matter, then we won't be able to move forward much.
Every moment where we focus much on what we can do to resolve the issues, I feel so bad about it as a man. But to be frank enough with you, on my personal capacity, on our institutional research, there are even more cases which are worse than the time. And it seems everybody now is focusing on the time. We've seen a lot of things happening by what you can call the authorities. No one says it because now it's on the social media. Everyone says time. People are dying because of poverty. People are failing to get access to education. Children are failing to have access to health. Those are some of the rights, the key rights as organizations, let's not focus much on our safe side. We are doing much of social media, but we're not doing much on the ground. We should avoid the situation which we see in Kenya. NGOs, they are now used just to people to get funds and they turn against the government and each other. We should learn and implement the real thing to stop all this. It has mine, to be specific. It wasn't like, I'm sure there are a lot of people who feel like the type of moral waste upon that, but he managed to say his voice out. But now some people were just maybe in the garden, in the park with him, but they couldn't support or do whatever. But now they are busy on the social network. Do this retire, do this retire. But let's implement the real thing. Let's focus on a real plan which we can stop this with one voice saying, we say no to this. Even writing a petition is far much better. A real petition on pen and paper, security committee organization. Thank you.
First one is on your comment about people waiting for the alignment of the laws, the constitution, for them to do something. There is no need to wait for anything. You know, yes, alignment we need, but in fact, you know, the constitution is clear. Any law that is inconsistent with this constitution, because the supreme law of the land is to the extent of the inconsistency, now they void. So I don't have to wait, you know, for POSA to be aligned, you know, to the constitution. Automatically, you know, if I were a government minister of justice, for example, I think on the stroke of a pen, you know, I would simply ensure that we've aligned all the laws, you know, to the new constitution. You see, by simply indicating that all these laws that are inconsistent, all those inconsistencies are deleted. You know, we don't need actually to spend so much time. And there's so much money being put into this whole debate about alignment of the laws, right? It's good, but we're actually probably investing in a lot of resources. We should be going elsewhere. So my call, obviously, to all of us here is that, you know what? If you feel like you want to demonstrate, right? You know, in support of Itai Zamar, notwithstanding what my colleague is saying there, right? You can go on and demonstrate now. You don't need to seek permission or clearance from the police, because the constitution allows you to demonstrate. That's my first point I wanted to make on the alignment of the, you know, of the laws. On empirical evidence, I like that point. It's very important that, you know, what we do is evidence-based. For us as an organization, and I think the members of the forum that we work with, I know that our work is evidence-based. From the forum perspective, we will not put out a report in the public domain that I am not prepared to stand in a court of law to defend it, right? Secondly, we actually litigate, like I indicated. We go to court, we litigate every day, right? We get judgments that actually vindicate our position, that people are being tortured, people are being harassed, you know, and we get these judgments every day. This is, I don't know how much more empirical evidence can be, right? But obviously, I think, you know, there could be other people who might be writing other things that don't have any evidence. But if you can come to the forum and point to me any report that you say, you know, where did you get this? I can tell you that we got this from here. And by the way, we actually took this to court. And this is the judgment that we've gotten. The problem that we have is not only about, you know, the decisions or the courts. You get some very good judgments, but those judgments are never respected. Sometimes they are, you know. But the challenge is, you know, enforcement of court orders as well. Probably we need writers like you to assist us. Maybe you have ideas about how can we actually ensure that, you know, we have these judgments that are coming from our courts respected. Because, you know, it makes people actually lose faith, you know, in the court system. And in the end, we might actually end up also with people actually resorting to, you know, self-help. Because if the formal process does not work, you know, why should I waste my energy going there? I should try to do something else.
Maybe I could also add on that, because I had seen that you were ready to leave. And also to say the people who are affected are real people like you and me. And we actually have details of the people who have been harassed and people who have failed to access food in a lot of communities. So this is the real issue that is actually affecting a lot of people in Zimbabwe. And that message needs to go out there to say that while we talk about every citizen, because I think the president is on record as having said that no citizen of Zimbabwe will go hungry. But I think when you go down into the communities, you will discover that there are all these machinations that are being used to deny other people access to food and agricultural inputs.
I'd like to add a point, especially on the issue of objective, empirical, evidence-based reports. I mean, that's something that, from our standpoint, we take extremely seriously. In fact, to us, that's the bedrock of how we think about reporting on human rights. We have standards of credibility that we use. We vet very thoroughly the reports that we get. We look at and scrutinize what we get from the NGO Forum and from other groups. And for us, we're not going to put out and write down in the Human Rights Report or in other places allegations that we don't think are substantiated. Because at the end, what do you have if you don't have the credibility and the objectivity at the heart of what you're discussing when it comes to human rights? So for us, we take that very seriously, and we work with groups all the time to double check, to verify, and to really make sure that we understand the context behind the different allegations that come through. I would also just make a general point. I heard a lot of interesting discussion about the notion of what role does the government play in terms of protecting human rights, or how does that balance vis-a-vis the individual rights of citizens? And I really think I hear oftentimes a narrative that the government here is here to protect the human rights of citizens, and I always get a little bit nervous when I hear that kind of rhetoric, because I really do believe that there are fundamental enshrined rights that derive from the individual, whether it's freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of association. And what that means in very basic terms is the individual has a right to express how they feel unimpeded by the authorities, that they have the right to worship as they choose, unimpeded by what the government or others say they can or cannot do, that they have the right to associate in gathering groups collectively, unimpeded by different institutional actors. And so, that's kind of how I think we really view the human rights issue. We think it's very much derived from the individual, and that's an important point that oftentimes it can be misrepresented.
Can I just jump in just quickly?
Yeah.
I also think, Larry is obviously now gone, but Larry is a comrade. We work in the new media space, so we're the guys who are passionate about what we do, and we set up media organizations that's from the ground up. The reason why he's asking for evidence, imagine a 263 chat article that speaks to some of the things you're talking about. Someone's going to question our credibility as a media organization. So if we actually had, we spoke to so-and-so and this is what she said, that could help. And I think maybe this may be a suggestion, you may already do this, but there are other organizations that aren't the traditional. I won't advocate for the one that I know for obvious reasons, but there are other organizations that are interested in exactly what you're describing, the work that you're doing, because we recognize that we do have an aunt or your grandmother, and there's an issue that needs to be discussed. But yeah, sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. It is quite clear that reference to empirical evidence from comments from the floor are pointers, really, that there are violations, and how do we deal with these violations? This is not a denial that we have a strong legal framework supporting human rights in this country. It's not that, and when we look at it from the Commission point of view, we believe there is need for concerted efforts of engagement with the duty bearers. Government and civil society, hitherto before the commission was created, were at loggerheads, a lot of fights, suspicions that this organization's mandate is regime change, and so on. And one of the responsibilities of the Commission is to mitigate those fights, make sure that duty bearers and those who are entitled to the holders of their rights at least come together. This is why the law is provided for establishment of various thematic working groups in which civil society organizations, public sector institutions are going to be, involved in human rights work. And they will then, the violators will become aware that what they are doing is actually a violation. It is wrong. But until that is, implemented, until that is operationalized, for lack of resources, I mean, we have to mention this repeatedly. You can't imagine me telling you that the Commission staff has not been paid the April salaries until today, when they were advised that you may have to check your bank accounts. It speaks for lack of resources I referred to, and we cannot deny the fact that there has to be progressive realization of a number of these rights issues. But I think what is clearly absent, because when we talk of democracy and human rights, we talk of development. What is lacking in our country, beautiful country here, is political development. There's a lot of intolerance, even intra-party intolerance. We have just been to Urungwe West constituency to investigate what has been taking place, and they are going to come up with a report which we are going to share with the perpetrators and the victims, and hoping that what has been done will not be repeated in other constituencies. So it is this aspect that we have to talk about as Zimbabweans, and they make sure that there's political tolerance, there's democracy. That's what democratic principles are all about. Tolerance of opposing views. This is the issue, and it takes all of us to tango to overcome the problems that we are going through at the moment. Thank you.
Well, my name is Innocent from NASCO, the National Association of Societies for the Care of the Handicapped. I have 3 questions. The first one is to Commissioner Mugwadi. From your discussion, your presentation, that I guess the Commission is underfunded. We get worried when the Human Rights Commission is underfunded. It means you might not be able then to monitor and investigate human rights abuse. What are you going to do as a commission? The second one, from the disabled persons organizations, we are very worried. I know people talk of the new constitution. The constitution is very elaborate on other human rights, but when it comes to disability, it's not compelling the government to provide services. It actually says when resources permit, meaning from the start, we were left out. Besides that, we made very strong recommendations, even to the drafters, but our recommendations were not taken even when they were drafting the present constitution, meaning we were already left out from the start with regards to disability rights. My third one is going to Steve. There are issues to do with restrictions put on to Zimbabwe leadership relating here, EU and USA. Are they working? Because I think it is the ordinary person who is suffering. And Zanu-PF is using that as a very strong card to say whatever goes wrong in this country is then sanctioned. Even if there is drought, it's sanctioned. Even if there is total abuse, human rights. So you find that those restrictions have made Zanu-PF more popular than anybody else because they use that. If you look at the 2013 elections campaign, Zanu-PF had won very strong. You vote MDC, you're voting for sanctions. sanctions, you are suffering because they are sanctioned. And I'm saying, are these working? Because it is now the ordinary person who is suffering. And if we're talking of human rights, when there is no clean water in Harare, you ask anybody, oh, we can't get clean water because of sanctions. Thank you.
Question on property rights and international law. We went to the SADC Tribunal. We got a final and binding court order from the SADC Tribunal back in 2008. In April or March 2009, the President said that he would not recognize any judgments from the SADC Tribunal, having first sent the Attorney General over to argue the case, and the Attorney General having given the assurance to the court that any judgment that came out of the court would be respected. And so in 2009 we had an invasion, our tractors were stolen, our crops were stolen, our workers were beaten up and put in high security jails, and we ended up eventually after 6 months of hell with our houses being burned down, and we were off the farm. And today the farm lies absolutely idle. Just the last week, Richard Dennis had a similar kind of situation. Minister Chombo wanted the farm, Caledonia Farm, just outside of Harare here, eastern side of Harare. A mob, about 30 vehicles, a mob came into the house 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Richard was fast asleep because he had been working the night shift, and woke up with his mob in the house. He was pushed out of the house, a tire was put around him. He was told to go back to America. He has no ties at all with America, was born in this country. And within 10 minutes, he was off the farm. He didn't have a shirt on. He wasn't able to grab his cell phone. He wasn't able to grab his passport or any clothes or anything. And today, he, his wife, his daughter are unable to get back to their property. This happens over and over and over again. We get court orders all the time. The government refuses to do anything about those court orders. I've got Dave Connolly sitting right next to me here. Rayan Mukuna, the Deputy Secretary in the President's office, is able to disobey the High Court, is able to be in contempt of court without the police arresting him. The police refuse to do anything in all these cases. And yet, they're allowed to get away with it time and time and time again. It's been 15 years now, and property rights are defunct in this country. That is the right reason why the people are hungry. That is the reason why there is serious problems with education, with health, with everything else, because we cannot function as an economy without human rights. Thank you.
On the issue of the Commission's capacity to deliver on its mandate, yes, it is definitely affected by lack of resources. We realize that the cake that is to be parceled out is so small, and we believe there is very little that the government under the circumstances can do. And we also believe this is why there was that provision in the Constitution of progressive realization of some of these socio-economic rights. The omission may be of a specific clause affecting our colleagues living with disability. There is that provision though, but the only one which I discovered was missing is one on the the right to housing. That specific, right aspect is not provided for in the current constitution. But through the Commission, we do have a thematic group for it's called a special thematic group, which consists of people living with disabilities, the elderly, and I believe those suffering from lack of sufficient skin pigmentation, the albinos. I understand they no longer want to be referred to as albinos. And as soon as funds become available, you definitely, or representatives of people living with disability will be incorporated into this working group. I think that's all I want to say. The issue referred to on the tribunal and so on, I think, Nicole, you remember me suggesting that, you know, there should be on this panel a representative from government. I have no mandate, in fact, to speak on that. In fact, I don't have sufficient information on that to respond.
You know, I think there's a couple points when it comes to our policy that are both mischaracterized and also, you know, sort of don't exactly get at the true heart of the matter when it comes to what they actually do and what they don't. You know, there's a lot of rhetoric and there's an impression, I think, that has been given that sanctions are responsible for the economic condition that Zimbabwe currently faces. And that just simply isn't true. You know, first of all, the sanctions policy, they aren't comprehensive sanctions. They are geared towards specific, specially designated nationals. So it's not as if the entire economy faces restrictions when it comes to trade and humanitarian assistance and so forth. In fact, what I would point out is that there is a significant amount of money that is given through U.S. assistance, both in terms of food security, in terms of global health, particularly our HIV/AIDS PEPFAR program. We have a very strong agriculture assistance program as well. There's a significant amount of humanitarian assistance. So, you know, first, just in terms of government expenditures alone when it comes to development humanitarian assistance, there's a tremendous amount that does go in, which sort of flies against the broader notion that sanctions are responsible for this or that. I would also say there's a significant amount of business in trade that does go on despite the restrictions, as long as they're not done with SDNs. And so, for example, there's a big tourism industry. I think something like 45,000 U.S. tourists visited Zimbabwe last year, which represents, outside of Africa, the highest number of citizens of a country visiting Zimbabwe of any country worldwide. So I think the first kind of misimpression I want to give is that, and I understand this is something that is oftentimes propagated, and this is part of the narrative, is that sanctions are responsible for some of the economic woes and economic issues that face the country, because I think we have a robust economic, trade, tourism, development, humanitarian relationship with Zimbabwe in spite of where the policy is. You know, I think the second thing I would say too is that, you know, I am very interested in hearing different perspectives about how people view the policy, about whether they think that it is the right tool and right approach when it comes to advancing the human rights agenda. So I think this is very useful for me to hear viewpoints on that. You know, I think for us, we don't look upon it as a static policy. It is something that, you know, if there is meaningful progress when it comes to the rule of law, when it comes to the human rights concerns that my partners and my friends on the panel have discussed, when we see the number of incidences of political violence that was described here, when things like that appreciably change, then that should also affect how we approach our policy as well. Thank you.
The whole issue goes down to the issue of impunity. And this culture of impunity is already, you know, engraved in most of the people who should be protecting these rights, especially for me, I think, the law enforcement agents. So my submissions will actually be directed to the Commissioner. I do appreciate the work that the Commission has been doing. You know, the issues of the evictions, the issues of investigating political violence, and many of the issues that actually affect the economic, social, and cultural rights. But I get worried when there's deafening silence to you know, issues specifically relating to political and civil rights. Especially, I'll get reference to the issue of Itaiza. We thought maybe, you know, as a leading commission would actually even get maybe a statement in the newspaper actually condemning surveillance. You know, we get people being lashed left, right, and center for demonstrating against xenophobia, and we've got this deafening silence again from the commission itself. Right now, I can safely tell you that we've got a body that is actually rotting in Chumbiza. And the reason being, the person had been arrested, tortured, assaulted, and made to die in cells. And the case, I think it was actually captured by H Metro for all newspapers, imagine. But there is nothing from the people who we think have the voice to actually then, you know, make some people jump in their seats in the, in the government. So I think, well, resources aside, I think sometimes they don't take even $50 to do that, to make, to conscientize people. Because at the end of the day, I think it's an issue of bringing into light these violations, that there can be checks and balances. So I don't know, Commissioner, how has been the Commission dealing with these issues? Are these issues not being brought to the Commission, or I don't know?
I want to make it very clear that the Commission should not be confused with any other activist, organization, a pressure group. It is an enforcer of human rights and works with all those that are affected. The factual issue, what developed after the realization that Itai Zamara had been abducted, was that the Commission had to engage the police formally, and they wrote to them. And they also went on to post a statement. If you look at our website, we would normally prefer that we file these statements through the dailies, but you have to pay if you are sending them as an advert. And when the Commission has no cent, in its coffers every penny, there's no way we can do that. But we have made various statements on that. We have also had, several meetings with even the Minister of Justice, with the VP, Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa, about this issue, requiring that the security organizations, as directed by that court order which was issued, should clearly make it known to the public that they are reporting to court every 2 weeks on the progress of the investigations they are carrying out. And if nothing is done, we would have done our part as the Commission. We can't do anything further than that. So we are not just sitting back. The issue of the xenophobic attacks, you see, it's strictly speaking an internal affair. But we made a statement which we sent through our sister national human rights institution in South Africa. We could not be seen to be attacking directly the South African government on that, or criticizing them on the action they are taking. That would be, interference in internal affairs, in management of internal affairs of another country. But we have sent a solidarity statement to the South African Human Rights Commission. As you may be aware, when they tried to intervene, they also received death threats. The chairperson there did receive death threats, and we sent statements, supporting the work they were doing. I think, that's as far as the Commission can go. And the Commission, as you well know, is still, not only underfunded, but understaffed. We have taken on the additional responsibilities of the former public protector, the Ombudsman, whose office was abolished, and the Public Protector Act repealed by the current constitution. We have done that, and the staff we have is a skeleton staff of only 36. We had appointed about 55. There have been massive resignations because of lack of resources. So we are supposed to be, tackling the two onerous responsibilities of two offices which have now been brought together through the efforts of only 36 human rights officers and other support staff, when we should, strictly speaking, be having about 120. So we just hope, progressively we'll get there and try to address human rights violations and issues in this country sufficiently to the satisfaction of the populace of this country. Thank you.
I just want to raise what, in my mind, two big problems about the human rights scene here in Zimbabwe. One is we have a culture of secrecy here. It is very difficult to get information. I think what Abel said about not even knowing how many prisoners were killed in Harare illustrates that. But the other thing is we cannot easily get information about is what is happening to all our wealth. There's a huge externalization of wealth going on. And we are very blessed with a lot of natural resources. Diamonds was the big topic of conversation for years. And yet we make an excuse that we cannot do this, we cannot give people water, we cannot give people food, we cannot do this because of lack of resources. We do not have the information about what is happening to our resources. So we have a system almost like apartheid South Africa, where an elite at the top are creaming off the resources and leading to a gross violation of rights. And the other difficulty is, not only can we not get the information, but the gross violation of rights in this country affecting people are things like, I remember the last chairman of Doctors for Human Rights saying the real torture that goes on in this country is not just by the police, or that's real torture, but it's the hundreds and hundreds of women who are dying over 3 or 4 days in agony in childbirth because they have no facilities. The hundreds of mothers that lose a child at giving birth, the maternal death rate has gone up hugely. It's the number of people being trafficked in South Africa, where the children are being groomed for prostitution, the women are being sold into prostitution. The labor, forced labor in South Africa, hardly paid at all, of Zimbabwean citizens is gross. We don't get enough information about it. But these are the huge violations of the rights of Zimbabweans caused by the creaming of our resources. But it's very difficult to link the cause and effect, as you can do when somebody bashes somebody on the head. How do we do that? And how do we get more information?
That's a very good question. I'm looking at the time. I know we've got other commitments. I want to thank the panel for taking the time to join us today. I want to allow them to maybe say their last sort of few words before we close the session. But we tweeted this question earlier on and said, what are your thoughts when you think or hear the term human rights? What does it mean? And someone's responded here, a guy called Eddie's responded, I think of Itai Dzamara. So that's something to think about. I'll ask, kindly ask the panelists to just sort of wrap up the last few words.
When rights issues are guaranteed in a document such as the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, it is an assurance. It gives hope to the people that there is serious intention on the part of government to promote, protect the rights of the people. And the establishment of a commission such as the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission is such further guarantee. The commission is available to respond to any complaint, to investigate, and to come up with an opinion of addressing such issues. I believe once the alignment has been completed, the commission will be empowered to also issue on its findings. And that again, should give hope to the people of this country that their rights have someone who is looking after them. Thank you.
I think as a last point, I get very concerned by the way that Zimbabweans are afraid to demand what is supposed to be theirs. And it's a very simple thing that is done, that images from the past are shown to them. And they are given threats that if you cross this line, this is what is going to happen to you. And I think in response to what Tony said about the police, I think we also, which is also related to what Val has said in terms of the wealth of this country, I think I get worried because there's a very thin line between state resources and how state resources are used to sort of push the agenda of the ruling party, which is where you come and find both the police, the secret police, the army, being complicit in some of the violations that we are talking about. And I think that's actually quite sad. And then listening to Commissioner Mugwadi, I think for Zimbabwe really, we have never been poor in terms of policies and in terms of the constitution. I'm thinking back that in the last constitution, the Lancaster House constitution, it was not allowed for someone to be abducted. I was abducted, tortured, and I was not protected by the law. But the Constitution spoke against that. And so I think we need to go beyond just having the document and saying we have a progressive document. There is need for us to be able to sort of cultivate a culture of constitutionalism, that it goes beyond just holding the document, but having the document enforced to the letter. Thank you.
Ben talked about, bringing the case before the select tribunal, getting a favorable judgment, the government not obeying, the orders. We also took a case to the select tribunal, we got an order, nothing happened. The problem obviously is that when you live in a society that does not cherish the rule of law, but believes in ruling by law, that is what we get in the end. When we live in a society that rewards impunity, that is what we get in the end. If we had to deal with the culture of impunity in this country, if we dealt with that culture of impunity, if we made sure that those people involved in abducting and torturing people are held accountable, then we would not be talking about most of these things we're talking about today. But because it seems like when you do that, you get rewarded instead of being actually, sanctioned, then there is an incentive for people to continue behaving the way they behave. My brother, why do we have to continue talking about the Thai Zamara? And notwithstanding the fact that there are many other people who, perhaps like you say, I don't know whether they can be a worse situation, than a family not knowing whether the breadwinner, the father, is ever going to come back alive home. I don't know about that. But certainly, if I were in a Thai Zamara's wife's shoes and his children's shoes, I think the most important thing in terms of human rights in this country today is to talk about Thai Zamara. bring back Itai Dzamara, you know, because if we don't actually talk about Itai Dzamara, we will never be able to talk about, you know, even those women who are dying every day in prison, I mean, in childbirth, you know, in hospital. You know. Continuously people will continue to die. But at least, you know, we know Itai Dzamara was abducted. We know there's a court order. Let's talk about that. You know. So I really would like it's a plea to people in this room to say, look, it's not about that Itai Dzamara, you know, is, you know, this nice journalist, you know, calm human rights activist. It is because Itai Dzamara is a human being, you know. And lastly, we do not as civil society confer rights on anyone. Neither does government, right? What we do as civil society is, you know, defend human rights. I talk about Itai Dzamara because he has got the freedom, that right to be free from abduction, you know. So I continue to talk about that. When I go and talk to my grandmother, you know, I'm not saying I'm conferring this right, you know, that we have got the right, you know, to know what government is doing. I'm simply highlighting things that she must know, so she can be able to hold the government or a legislator to account. So let's not confuse each other here to say civil society is going out there and conferring rights. We do not confer rights, we defend rights, and we raise awareness of human rights. That's our role.
It's been really instructive and insightful for me to both hear the different questions that people have posed and what's on your minds, and also to hear you know, the thoughts and perspectives of my panelists. In fact, I would say it's really been inspirational. You know, it really kind of, I think, reinforces to me the notion that, you know, the human rights agenda, it's a struggle. It's not something that's accomplished overnight, but it is, you know, ultimately when it comes to Zimbabwe and the people of Zimbabwe, it's your country. You deserve to have transparency about where your money is going. You deserve to have accountability for the violations and that you deserve to have the full complement of your rights respected and protected, and you know, whether it's the ability to express yourselves, whether it's the ability to participate in free and fair elections, whether it's the ability to gather and associate as you would like. So, you know, I would say there's a lot of difficult challenges out there that we've heard. I am heartened by the fact that when you have people who are committed and dedicated to the human rights agenda, whether on this panel, in the audience, or beyond, that is where the change will happen, and that's something that, you know, we as a government want to support. So I really appreciate the opportunity of being here, and I learned quite a bit this afternoon.
Without holding you guys hostage, because that's against human rights, I guess. I'd like to declare this public meeting, this event, finally over.